Hi, welcome to Maverick and Farmer Coffee. My name is Ashish Diabrio, and this video is part of your coffee sensory analysis kit, the one that you've purchased or has been gifted to you. Now, this is going to take about 15 to 20 minutes depending on how you want to pace it. So, I'd suggest find a nice quiet corner in your home and get that little guide that we've sent you along with this kit, okay, and a pencil or a pen to make notes on that, and let's just get right into it. So the two coffees that we are going to be cupping is basically short for cup tasting, okay? The two coffees that we're going to be tasting today are the washed processed coffee and the dry processed coffee. Both of these coffees are from the very same plant, from the very same estate, okay? They've just been processed differently, and it's very evident in terms of the way they taste when they're processed differently. Let me quickly explain to you what washed processed and dry process is. So imagine you've taken two coffee cherries, you've harvested two coffee cherries from the same plant, and one cherry is just being dried out in the sun for about 13 to 14 days. All the skin and the pulp, the fruity pulp, everything just dries onto the bean, and finally it just becomes a very porous substance around the green bean, and that is milled, and finally you get to that green bean, and that is basically dry processed or natural processed coffee. On the other hand, if you take the other bean and you just bash it around and remove the skin and remove the pulp and do a little bit more processing until you get to that very central green bean, and that is then dried out in the sun for about 8 to 12 days depending on the heat and moisture content, and that is called washed or wet processed coffee. Okay, so it's the same plant, it's the same coffee from the same estate, just processed slightly differently, but the difference in taste is very evident, and that's what we're going to taste today. Now we're going to do the method of cupping, but you could brew the coffee in any way you want to. For example, if you use a French press, normally you could do two different brews using a French press. The first glass can have the washed coffee, and the second glass or cup can have the dry processed coffee. Okay, but I'm going to do the cupping method today, and it's fairly simple. We just take about one heaped tablespoon of coffee powder. Okay, so put washed processed coffee powder into 1 cup. That's about 11 grams. And in the other glass or the other cup, you put one heaped this exact same amount or 11 grams of dry or natural processed coffee into that cup. Okay, if you have a weighing scale at home, that's really great. If you don't, one heaped tablespoon, right? And now what we're going to do is I'm just going to tear this. So what you could do is, of course, just take a whiff of the dry aroma of just this ground coffee and see if you can spot the difference between the two. There is a difference, okay? And to this I'm going to add 180 grams of boiling hot water, just short of boiling hot water. If you don't have, again, a measuring scale, a weighing scale at home, these very regular coffee cups or teacups at home, they're approximately 180 to 190 grams. Okay, so you could measure that way, but I'm going to use my weighing scale and just take it up to, yep, 180 grams. I'll put that back there, and quickly the next one. Now the whole point of this exercise is for you to eventually figure out which coffee, which kind of processing you like best. Okay, it's not like one is better than the other or one is more superior than the other. Both have their plus points and the minus points, and it's up to you to decide which one you like best. And that little guide sheet that you have in front of you, fill it up properly and you will be able to decide. So the next time you want to order coffee, you can specify and say, I'd like to go for wet processed or washed coffees, or I'd like to go for naturals or dry processed coffees. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, if you want to take another whiff of this aroma, which is now called the wet aroma, the wet fragrance, you could go ahead and do so and make a little notes. But so this is going to brew for about 4 minutes. That's the standard time, and then I'll tell you what needs to be done. So put this video on pause, wait for 4 minutes, and then get back. Okay, we're back. It's almost 4 minutes now. Uh, Now what I want to do is I have this control sample that this time what we're going to use is instant coffee, and your kit will have a little bit of instant coffee that we've added in. Okay, so this is just help us as beginners to understand the differences between these two coffees. We keep referring back to this instant coffee brew. You could choose any coffee you want, something that's very flat or something that's maybe some old coffee powder or coffee powder that you don't really like or whatever. I'm going to use instant coffee today, and the ratio is 1 teaspoon for the same 180 grams of water. Okay, and this does not need to brew, like instant coffee dissolves in water immediately. So I'm going to do that right now. Right, so our 4 minutes is now up. I'm just going to keep this aside, and what you do is this top part that you see where the coffee powder, the coffee grinds have gathered in both cups. Okay, the top part that you see is called the crust. You want to break that crust, and when you break that crust, there's some very unique aromas that are going to come out. If you want to, if you feel up to it, you can go right in there, stick your nose in there, and try to get a whiff of those aromas. Okay, so So there are some very different aromas coming out from both these cups now, and if you notice, if you've been paying close attention, you'll notice that the aromas are very different from the dry aromas. Okay, so now the coffee is beginning to develop as a brewed coffee, as a drinkable cup of coffee. Okay, now this is still hot, and you really don't want to burn your palate at this moment, because then you'll have to stop this and come back a few days later because you won't be able to taste anything. I like to keep my coffee really almost down to room temperature before I start tasting it, but it's up to you. I would say I'm going to wait for about 8 to 9 minutes for this coffee to completely cool down, and that's when you can really taste the coffee at its best. But if you can do a little hotter, that's fine, but definitely not more than 60 degrees centigrade. Right, so I think it's been about 8 minutes for me. I don't know how long it's taken for you to get your coffee down to a very comfortable temperature. I would say a few seconds more to go. But just remember, I just want to remind you that this is exactly the same coffee that we're talking about. We're talking about Arabica from the same farm that has been processed differently but has been roasted in exactly the same way. Both are medium roasts, so there's no change there whatsoever, right? So what we just need to do is skim the surface and clear out all the grits that are there, because that will leave a bitter, gritty taste in your mouth, right? So you could just take it out like that. The reason also why you don't want to drink your coffee, you don't want to cup or taste your coffee too hot, is because the bitterness is slightly heightened at that temperature, and as the coffee cools down, it tastes more of the finer nuances can be seen. And when the coffee goes really cool, uh, those same nuances stay unless there are defects. If there are defects in the coffee, if there's a lot of unripe beans or what we call stinker beans or whatever, then those flavors, those off notes get highlighted even more. Okay, so like I said, we're going to keep it simple. We're only going to rate our coffees, or we're going to decide on 4 parameters. Okay, so the first is the mouthfeel. What exactly is mouthfeel? It's basically what the coffee feels like, the sip or slurp of coffee feels like in your mouth as soon as it goes in, and nothing else, nothing to do with the way it tastes or the way it smells or flavor, nothing, what notes, nothing at all. Just how does it feel as you slurp your coffee. So go ahead, take a spoon where you can sort of, any tablespoon that you can sort of collect the brew like this. Okay, so a soup spoon actually works pretty well. So I'm going to start with the natural. Now, when you're tasting, you should try and make as loud a slurping noise as possible, because you want to mix in as much oxygen or air along with your coffee as it hits your palate. So it goes all over your palate at exactly the same time, right? And also, that mixture of air and the coffee helps you to smell the coffee better. So that was a natural processed coffee. Go right ahead, and you can keep pausing the video as you want to. This is a washed coffee. If this cupping gets too much for you and you feel you're drinking a lot of black coffee and you're not used to it, you can just go ahead and spit it out. So you just take your slurp and then very politely spit into a cup. Keep the cup with you. Okay, so now is the time to make those notes. What does this mouth feel like? Does it feel creamy? Does it feel very viscous? Does it feel velvety? Does it feel very thin? Does it feel very short? What does this mouth feel like? As soon as you take that sip of coffee, what does it feel like in your mouth? There are some cues and some indicators also given in your guide sheet on the left hand side. Read those and try and analyze and see what are those words that closest come to what you are trying to describe. Okay, I can definitely say one feels a little heavier than the other. I'm not going to tell you which one, because then this whole exercise would be pointless, and that's for you to actually think and analyze and find what those differences are, right? So yeah, one is definitely feeling a lot lighter on my palate, and it's sort of uh, it's thinner for sure, and the other is feeling very velvety. It's feeling like there's something very well-rounded that's in my mouth. Okay, so that's about mouthfeel. Okay, make those notes. So now the next parameter that we're going to judge these two coffees by is acidity. Now in India, of course, acidity has a sort of negative connotation. It means that either this juice or this coffee is very sour, or it does something my stomach. It does not make my stomach feel too good. But with coffee, actually, acidity is a good thing, and cups are scored all across the world based on their acidity. Acidity can be very refreshing. Okay, so it's that tingling sensation, that mild tingling sensation that you get on either side of your palate, right at the back. Okay, it's like when you have, of course, things like oranges or grapefruit or whatever. So try and decide what kind of acidity are you experiencing with these two cups. Is it sour? Is it a sweetish sour? Is it a fruity sourness? Is it a very refreshing, juicy sourness? Does it make your mouth sort of salivate when you drink this coffee? Okay, try and understand. Pay close attention now to only the acidity. Forget about the mouthfeel, and try and figure out what kind of references you can pick up from that experience. What can you relate it to? Maybe some juice that you drank, some fruit that you bit into, uh, I don't know, anything, some dessert that you had, something that you could really feel that's not sour and not, well, is it a bittersweet acidity? Okay, so look through those notes again. There are little pointers, little cues. Try and associate and see what best matches your experience with either of these coffees. Now, right away, I can say that one coffee has much lower acidity levels, right? Because and it's not because it's a dark roast coffee. Normally, darker roasts tend to lose out on acidity. Both of these coffees are roasted in exactly the same manner. Both are medium roast coffees, but one of these coffees, the acidity is slightly lower. Not just slightly, it's fairly lower actually. Okay, um, and the other one, it's quite pronounced. It's very refreshing. It's very clear. For one of these coffees, I know exactly what kind of acidity it is. The other one, it's muted, and I'm not exactly sure if I can pinpoint what I can relate to in terms of that acidity. Pause the video, take your time, keep sipping both the coffees, and use the instant coffee as your reference point. Okay, so go back to the instant coffee, Definitely spit if you want to, and then go back to each of the coffees. Huge difference, huge difference. Instant coffee, and now this one. In my case, the instant coffee has almost zero acidity, and this is probably the coffee that's also with you because we've sent you that sachet. It has almost zero acidity. It's very candy-like, this coffee. Uh, but here in these two coffees, there is a much more pronounced acidity. One is slightly muted, however. Okay. Now we're going to go into the aftertaste. What is aftertaste? Aftertaste is basically when the coffee leaves your mouth. So either you've spat it out or you've swallowed it. What kind of an effect or experience does it have on your palate, on your tongue? Does it stay there for some time? Is it lingering? Is it short? Is it just you sip it and it's gone? Can you recall that taste after about a minute? Does it have that much of an aftertaste? Are you able to taste notes of caramel or chocolate after you've swallowed your coffee? Are there slight spice notes in the aftertaste? So you swallow your coffee and then, yes, of course, there is a coffee flavor, and that goes for all coffees. But beyond that, what else can you experience once you've swallowed your coffee? Normally, coffees with slightly thicker or heavier bodies tend to have a slightly longer aftertaste. Which one of these two coffees do you think has a longer aftertaste? It's very clear that one of them does have a longer aftertaste. Pause the video, make notes, and then come back. Okay, now the final parameter on which we're going to judge these two coffees is the flavor. Okay, one of the most important and enjoyable parts of drinking coffee, and that's the flavor. Now, all those aromas that we were smelling in the beginning, the dry aroma and the wet aroma, all of that actually, in practical terms, comes down to when you're sipping the coffee, and it's those aromas that actually define the flavor. Yes, your nose plays a big and very important part in the way you taste and experience coffee flavor. What flavor nuances are you able to perceive or experience with these two coffees? Okay, so here it's very important to keep going back to your control sample or your reference point, which is the instant coffee, which has zero flavor besides just being coffee with notes of caramel or whatever, right? Keep going back here, especially as a beginner. This is a great way to experience this process of cupping. So you go to the instant coffee, take a sip, and now go here, pause, make notes, try and think and see what kind of flavor are you getting. Is it a stone fruit? Is it some sort of a, is it citrusy? Does it have slight berry notes? Which berry? Are you able to pick out, I don't know, strawberry, blueberry? If you've tasted blueberry, I haven't actually. What notes are you able to pick out while tasting this coffee? Again, I say, at the base of it is always just the coffee flavor, but beyond that, there's something else. And for both of these, for one coffee, it's very clear. The clarity of flavor is much more precise for one coffee. For the other coffee, it's a little clouded. There's a couple of things going on. I think you're able to taste some stone fruit, but it's quite possible that you're not able to pick out which stone fruit. Is it cherry? Is it plum? What is it? You know that there's probably some apple or pear, one of those two, but you're not very clear about which one. But for one coffee, it's very clear, it's very clean, it's very bright and sharp, and for the other coffee, it's slightly muddled, but it makes up in terms of other things, right? So make those notes and keep sipping the coffee, keep going back to your reference point, take a 5-minute break, come back to acidity, come back to mouthfeel, and then when you're done, try scoring each parameter. Try scoring each parameter and add up all these scores. for each parameter, for each coffee, and you have your first coffee cupping score for these two coffees. Decide which coffee you like better, and the next time you want to place an order for coffee, you can say which of your coffees are wet processed or washed coffees, and which coffees are dry processed or naturals, and therefore I would like to pick up this one. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks for being a part of this experience. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do get in touch with us if you have any questions. If you really want to say, okay, these are the notes that I've got, but what is it supposed to be? We can help you out there. We can tell you what notes we are consistently getting for either of these coffees. Thank you.